Hello, this is Michael Smook for YouTube Commentaries. Today is October 10th, and it's a Monday. Happy Columbus Day. We're in the year 2016. And today the topic of conversation is how spirituality has changed my life. Today we're going to talk about how two near-death experiences has changed my life. We're briefly going to talk about how by simply reading a book on history I could feel a sense of spirituality. And we're going to summarize, and I'm going to talk to you about 5 daily affirmations which help guide me, which are greatly influenced by these near-death experiences and how much it helps me focus in on people and helps me in terms of work and my personal life and lessons learned from these experiences. And before we get into that, I'm going to give you a preface or pre-introductory comments, an introduction, and then we'll move on to the topics. So, as terms of a preface, let me say this. The reason why I decided to do these YouTube commentaries stems from the fact that I talk about topics that truly resonate inside me and topics that truly move me, where I feel compelled to talk about. In the past, I've spoken to you about civil liberties, human rights, politics, and governing. When I talk about politics and governing, I'm talking about the presidential race, domestic policy, and how we can create win-win situations to cross the ideological divide. And in similar matter, my most recent YouTube commentary, I talk about American foreign policy, the presidential race, and it's the same thing. I'm thinking, how can we bring together, how can we get to real substantive issues, how we can cross the ideological divide and group us all together as Americans. We're all Americans and we're all in this together. Now that I've made these pre-introductory comments, let me start my introduction. We're talking about spirituality today, but I was thinking I would just stick to the word spirituality. But when I talk about spirituality, frequently the word God comes into meaning. Some people like to talk spirituality and they don't necessarily believe in God, but I differ and I do, so I will talk about God as well. And so with that said, let's move forward together. In addition, I forgot, what I also want to talk about, I'm also Jewish, and I think that has an impact in my life, and I think that doesn't make me prejudiced. Actually, it gives me empathy towards other people. In fact, the core to being Jewish, I feel, is rachmanis, empathy, tzedakah, which is charity and good deeds, and tikkun olam, heal the world. So I think I work with people who are Christians and Muslims and from other faiths, and I also I have friends who are Republicans, even though I'm a Democrat. So I think that because of my religious background, my upbringing, greatly helps me have empathy and reach out to other people. About my religious background, I grew up a Reformed Jew in Long Island, which is within New York State, and inside Long Island is Nassau County. I grew up in the South Shore of Nassau County in an unincorporated hamlet or village called Wantagh. It's an 8-mile bike ride to Jones Beach, and as a teenager in my early 20s, we would ride down by bike to Jones Beach State Park, and also the Nikon Theater is down there. In terms of my religious background and my upbringing, I was bar mitzvahed at 13. At the age of 20, I was able, through a Jewish communal organization, was able to go to Israel for 10 days. After I graduated college, I was very much involved in the movement to free Soviet Jewry. There were 3 million Jews imprisoned in the Soviet Union, and I would go to rallies, and based upon that interest, I became friends after I received my bachelor's degree with students who went to Hofstra and Adelphi who were involved in the Hillel Jewish Students Organization. And it's with this feeling of Jewishness that I decided to join UJA Federation Leadership Development Division, where I met my wife. I was 30 years old, and I was married at the age of 31. So that's a little bit about my background. And then some definitions that until about 3 years ago, how I thought about God and spirituality. And then we'll move on to how that's changed. In terms of God, for a long time, my definition of God you could fit on a bumper sticker. I would say God created man, and then man created God. And I Googled that the other day, and it said it came from the book of Genesis. For now, I'll take Google's word that that's where that quote came from. In terms of spirituality, spirituality meant getting together with nuclear family, extended family, friends. When I was involved in the Hillel organization and also UJA, we'd go to Shabbatons, to a hotel. There would be some prayer and discussion, but it was also a way to socialize with people of my same religious faith, and people of different orientations. I'm a Reformed Jew. Some people were conservative, Orthodox, traditional Orthodox, or modern Orthodox. So that expanded my worldview of being Jewish. In terms of spirituality, it's during holidays, we'd be carrying the Torah around the synagogue for a holiday called Simchas Torah, or we'd be singing and dancing the Hora, or we'd be eating foods at synagogue or at the homes of my parents or my aunts and uncles or grandparents before that. So that gave me a sense of spirituality. There are many ways of finding God and finding spirituality, and that's a little bit about my thinking through my 20s, 30s, until about 3 years ago. And then things changed. I added on to that, and it changed in a very important way. I think that near-death experiences have changed the way I look at the world. And it all started January 31st, 2014. I came into work that day. I thought I was fine. 5 days before, I saw my internist. He said, "You're fine." I saw my dentist. I had periodontal scaling, and I was gingivitis free after that appointment. And what happened at work, 5 seconds before I collapsed, I didn't know it was coming. I collapsed on the floor. I was in and out of consciousness. They brought me to the emergency room, and I could hear the doctors and nurses talking. They said I had a stroke. And the next thing I knew, I woke up in the morning. And the first thing I knew, before I realized I was hooked up to 2 or 3 machines, I realized that my mind remembered my name. I knew who I was. When you have a stroke, sometimes there's a cutoff in blood, and the oxygen and blood flow to the brain. It could cause death, permanent, long-term, short-term cognitive impairment. And I was pretty much in charge of all my faculties, which I knew. I didn't know how sick I was, but I was off to a good start. I also had another problem. I had something called endocarditis. That's an infection in my aortic valve to the heart. So while in hospital, while in the emergency, they treated me for the stroke, and while in intensive care and in my hospital bed, they continued to treat me with antibiotic therapy. And after a day or two, I was released to a hospital bed in a ward. I had 5 other ward mates, and I was in one of these ill-fitting cloth hospital gowns, and I wanted to get out of bed, take a shower, shave, brush my teeth, and feel better, and get into some clothes. And on the way to the bathroom, I ran into a doctor, and that conversation changed my life forever. What happened was, the doctor came up to me, he shook my hand, he gave me his card, and he mentioned his name. And he said to me, in the emergency room the other day, we saved your life. Nobody has ever spoken to me like that. And it changed, pardon me for a second, it changed everything forever. I think when you're faced with your own mortality and you have a conversation about it and you've survived, as I like to put it, if you don't find spirituality or God, you'll never find it. And that changed everything forever. And every day from now on, when I get out of bed, I just say to myself, thank God I'm alive. And sometimes at work, people will say to me, oh, it's Monday, I can't wait till it's Friday. I only want it to be Friday. And I have to embrace every day as it's going to be my last day. So that's why I'll say to them, and I'll laugh, I'll say, I'll take whatever day I can get. So that encounter with that doctor, I didn't keep his card. I still don't remember his name, but it changed my life forever. I was released from the hospital, and for the next 3.5, and I went back to work. For the next 3.5 months, between the cardiologist and the cardiovascular surgeons, there was a conversation going back and forth. And eventually, it was decided that I needed surgery, and I needed a heart valve replaced. When you say aortic valve replacement, it doesn't sound so bad. When you say open heart surgery, you say, wow. And so I knew that was big. And my cardiologist recommended a doctor, a skilled surgeon. She had a medical degree from Harvard University. And instead of going to a residency, a surgical residency in New England, she went out to Stanford University for a 10-year internship and residency program. And the first 7 years were general surgery. The next 3 years were cardiovascular surgery. And she won awards, and she was a terrific surgeon, and I met her a couple of times. And in the process of all this, let me just stop for just a second and tell you this. I'm going to talk about, I have a sister and 2 brothers, and I believe in people's privacy. So instead of referring to my brother or my sister, I'm going to use the word sibling, because I feel a level of confidentiality is important while I tell a story. It's a good story, but I think people deserve their own privacy. Now that I've said that, let me move forward with this story. At a certain point, I had a conversation with my sibling, and my sibling thought that I should go to see other doctors in Nassau County and go to a hospital that specializes in cardiovascular surgery. And we had a conversation. The level of conversation became loud. You could call it an argument. And since it was my call, I decided to stay where I was. And my sibling, although however well-intentioned, I decided to stay with my decision. And my wife thought that was a well-thought-out decision. So the thing about it is, I had open heart surgery in June of 2014. And when I came out of surgery, and the anesthesia wore off, and I was being intubated, so I was basically choking on this equipment in my mouth and down my throat. And I was begging the nurse and the physician assistants for water since I was dehydrated. Instead, they gave me ice chips. And after I noticed my wife, I saw my sibling speaking to my surgeon. And they were getting on like friends. They knew each other famously, it seemed like, and I couldn't help but smiling at the time. So the thing about it is, let's move up 8 to 10 weeks. I'm ready to go back to work, and I'm in a restaurant called Lucky's on 34th and 1st, which is not far from the hospitals where my surgeon worked and had offices, NYU, Bellevue, and VA Hospital. So I'm having lunch with my sibling, and out of the corner of my eye, I see my surgeon. And I wasn't going to make a thing out of it, and the surgeon didn't recognize me first. She recognized my sibling first. And then they're getting along once again famously, like they knew each other. And they were talking no longer than 3 to 5 minutes. And then she recognized me, and we're talking. And it was a good talk. And I was glad to see out of all of this that, one, I was healthy, I was going back to work, that I thought it was interesting that the name of the restaurant was called Lucky's, and also that even though my sibling and I had a bit of an argument over which doctor I should go with, I'm glad that everything worked out. Now, it seemed like a really important moment. My surgeon and my sibling didn't see it that way, but I saw it as a really important moment. And after lunch, I went to a park and I looked it up. And it reminded me of something I took in a philosophy course. And the word for what happened is synchronicity. This is when a lot of positive things come together at one time, and either it's a question of probabilities, or you have a feeling that the direct hand of God came down and is sending you a message, and it's a significant moment. These things happened at weddings, funerals, all sorts of festive occasions, sometimes solemn occasions. And this time it was after I had gotten through a near-death experience and I was on the road to being completely healthy. It seemed like a very important, significant moment. So just to summarize, my conversation with the senior attending ER physician who helped save my life, and my surgeon and my sibling meeting at the same time just before I went back to work, that seemed equally meaningful. So I think that when you see symbolism, and it's important, you need to grab a hold of it, keep it, and remind yourself. And it serves as a spiritual feeling, and it's a reminder, and it's a motivation. Now that I've said that, let me speak briefly about how reading books on history, I can gain a spiritual feeling. Among the authors I've ever read on history, the history of the Jews, there's an author, Max de Monte. I've read many authors. I've read books on the history of the Jewish people. I've read books on the history and politics of Israel and the Middle East. De Monte had a similar approach that I find quite remarkable. He talks about after one of the greatest tragedies in Jewish history, in which the Second Temple was destroyed, hundreds of thousands of Jews were killed in a civil war. It was just after the time of Jesus Christ. And the Jews were dispersed throughout the known world, and somehow, over 1900 years, they survived. And the reason Jews survived stems from the fact we went into the world, we learned other languages and cultures from other countries. We took our holy books, we learned professions and trades, and to keep a roof over our head, food in our stomachs, clothes on our backs, and sustain our temples, since we could no longer return to Israel, which was then called Palestine. We created our own synagogues, temples, and community centers to meet. So the fact that we survived defeat by the Romans, we were not absorbed into Christianity or Islam, we We survived expulsion from England, as well as Inquisition in Spain and Portugal. We persevered over Russian pogroms and Nazi Holocaust. During the Holocaust, 35 out of 100 Jews on the planet Earth were murdered in 6 years. 3 years after the Holocaust, the first Jewish state arose. After 1900 years, there were, with a population of only between 600,000 and 700,000, they held off 5 Arab armies and were able to persevere and remain a new country. So the way I'm thinking is, I find it all quite remarkable in terms, and I find a spiritual feeling as a Jew in reading this history, and we make up only 0.1% of the world's population, but I would call it a sense of cultural or ethnic pride. We not only have influenced our own people, there are 14 million Jews in the world, there are 3.8 billion Christians and Muslims that look to their patriarch and matriarchs as Abraham, Sarah, and Hagar. So I like to think that Jews and Christians were all cousins, which gives me hope for peace in the world, even in some of the most contentious areas of the world, including the Middle East. And I believe in terms of ethnic pride, being such a small number of people, not only in the spiritual and theological sense, in the secular world, we have a rather large footprint. So I think what I came away from this is a sense of spirituality. When you read history, you think it's all dates, events, names, locations, and I remember at a certain point, something I learned 30 and 40 years ago, reading Max de Montt. He wrote 2 books, Jews, God, and History, and The Indestructible Jews. But I remember after this near-death experience rethinking this. I thought about it through, and I said, my God, this is just not a bunch of historical facts. There's something going on here. Either the Jews called Hebrews or Israelites of antiquity, either God spoke directly to them, or they were divinely inspired to do good deeds. And this doesn't mean that we're better than any other group. If we are sometimes referred to as the chosen people, it's because we were given the 10 Commandments. And we're to share that with other people. But we're not a proselytizing group. And we try to carry, in the way we take care of business, the best balance between confidence and humility. So by simply reading 2 books on Jewish history, I come up with a sense of spirituality, and I could see how we've affected our relations, not only our own religion, but our relations with Christians and Muslims. We could even expand that in terms of communists. 1.5 or 1.6 billion people in this world live in communist countries. And who created communism? It was Karl Marx, a lapsed Jew. And I'm not speaking just about China, I'm speaking about North Korea, Vietnam, Laos, and Cuba. So we have a rather large footprint on the world, and we've had a large impact. Doesn't make us better. It's better to be humble, and it's better to reach out to other monotheistic faiths and other faiths from the Far East. So anyway, now that I've talked about spirituality in terms of near-death experiences, and in terms of just reading history books, let me also talk about lessons learned. I think that when you come close to dying, you really want to appreciate life, and you want to learn lessons from the past which will sustain you throughout life. So I have 5 daily affirmations, which I tell myself, which greatly influence how I behave. Number one is talk less, listen more, ask thoughtful questions. The next one is stay focused, remain calm, retain your sense of humor. One of the things I discovered in the last 3 years is it's far better in any conversation I have with anyone, family, friends, coworkers, somebody I meet on the street, it's far less important that in a conversation or an argument that I'm right. It's far less important that anybody I talk to thinks that I'm smart or funny. It's far more important that the person that I'm speaking to understands that that they're respected and they're listening to, and I'm listening to them. That I understand what they're thinking and how they're feeling. Okay, the third daily affirmation is it's far more important to try to have the right balance between confidence and humility. If you have confidence but you're not arrogant or narcissist, people like you. If you have humility, sometimes a little self-deprecating, people respect that as well. So people appreciate the fact when you have a right balance between the two. In terms of that, what I'm thinking is that if you forget the first three, go back to if you forget the first three, and you're on to number 4, go back to number 1. So now that I've given you 4 lessons learned over the last 3 years in terms of daily affirmations, it's been a pleasure talking to you. So this is Michael Smook for YouTube Commentary. Today is October 10th. The year is 2016. It's a Monday. It's Columbus Day. Until next time, goodbye and good luck.